Welcome to TradeTheMBA.com. This is John. This report is for the 12th of September. And, well, didn't we get that? Now, we've been talking since, this DOC spread right over here about being in a short configuration around 2173, and we've gone sideways as we've continued to dip. Had a little bit of a reset with this pop right here, but it was unable to hold. And we talked about this yesterday where met, got rejected, and look what happens when you get rejected on that crossover of the midterm buyers and that. Just boom. And are we oversold? No. Didn't even reach it on minus 56 points it was, and didn't get oversold. So that gives you an indication of the potentials. Now, we don't have any retest markers from at least an algorithm standpoint. This was multifold. I mean, some people are going to blame it all on the Fed, but I think it probably had more to do with the polls showing things tightening than it did anything. There's been an inflation based on the expectations, and when polls get tighter, there's some nervousness, and people take some money off to evaluate whether they have positioned themselves correctly. And that was that. Plus, we don't have any new money coming in for another month or so. So this is a lot of people holding on to some powder and staying lean. You can see from the NQ, it's also fading dramatically. It's gotten oversold in the Dow, obviously oversold from that configuration. You'll notice the difference between these paint bars and that first ES. That was the new one that we're working with that takes into account all of these DOC readings. Includes the orange bar. Now, some people ask me, it's like, I don't have an orange bar with mine. You don't. So let's go over what you do. If you click the format part of it, this pops up, and what you're going to see is this X812. And here's where you go to the color part. And normally it would be a blue configuration. I typically go to other. I clicked an orange. You can add it to your custom color list. You push OK, and that becomes the color. Now, in this particular case, the chart doesn't have it because orange is off. Normally, I think the default is blue. So if you see a dark blue, that would be the same thing. It's just not always easy to see. So when I click OK here, it's going to clear the chart, redo it, and there's the orange. Now, I think that's too thin for me, and normally for the videos, I improve the thickness of it. So under Style, where it says line, I go to one extra weighting right there, and lo and behold, boom, it augments it like that. So that's typically how I would configure that configuration right there, so you'd be able to see it. You can see right here where we had to move above plus 13.5, dip below the 7.5 right there, and we took off. It was a nice little run. Then we ended up with the DOC spread right there, and we had the plus 13 for the orange, which is effective on the daily. On the intraday, we usually like to see the well, anything over 4 on the crossover. So this was 3. Next day ended up at 5, and that's why it would trigger. So hopefully that makes it easy to see that in real time. We knew that we had positive extreme that needed to be retraced on gold. It did just that. Now is where you would look for new signaling up below the ADM and that as well. Wasn't going to continue. I warned about TLT being way over the top, especially given that it's been in a sell for all of August, and only finally now reacting. It happens. Same thing with the euro, has just been neutral. Then it got a little bit of a short spread when it had the spike, but held up well, and it's back into a somewhat bullish configuration. We might see the beginnings of transition there, but not yet. Not yet. Now, here we go. Here's the case chart. You can see we ended up with the short signal. Now the orange one represents when the orange reaches a reading of over 20. And in this particular case, it was 22.52 for that X812. And similar to the same short signal that we would have regardless, because if you look, the cyan was at 676. It went a few bars before anything took place. That was right around the 72 marker, and then you can see as it went, you don't see any new buy signals or configuration. And we hadn't even been using that one. We've been, oh, here's 50K, just in case people were wondering. There you can see is the test 4 version. Likewise, sell signal, and then boom, it finally took off. Interesting that you had the orange skyrocket. What was the value for this 50K? And I hadn't even really looked at 50K. It says 823, 1823. So it's close in the peak, but well over with the, well, from at least the original break, which was right here. Let's look at what the numbers were. We had 506, then it jumped to 691. So all of these were good. Now it had a little spike going in between on the changeover contract, but still wasn't enough to affect anything. And you can see straight deterioration. Let me get my other 5K up. All right, here's my 5K. Now look at this chart. We ended up close. Okay, so no, let's examine this a little bit closer, because this was some interesting points that came in here. People saw some resets with the steel above, the cyan, and it's like, okay, now let's go into order of operations. From there, we turn to our shakeout. Is the shakeout's white histogram or colored histogram, whichever? In this case, it would always have to be white if you're going to try and go long, or it would turn green, one of the two. Would need to be above the negative 13.5 line. Not in this case. So move on to the next one. A little bit better, but still no. Now, next one. This one looks really good. Okay, so we've got the negative 13. Then boom, now we wait until we get to the point of the dip of the steel right there below the 7.5. That's the first moment. And as soon as it does, we look at our shakeout, and what happened? The histogram moved below the yellow. No go, because it means that short-term buyers have faded the situation even as it was just starting to get action. Now, prior to that, if we looked at any of those, even when it first triggered, overbought from an extreme standpoint. Anytime you're inside that minus 15 range, overbought. Now, in this particular case, it wasn't going to be, except for that histogram, but then the next bar, even though it came up under the inside of it, still overbought. So that was ugly. So, turn to the next one. Likewise, similar situation. Only problem with it, one as well, is when it dips below. We're right at the edge there, but that white dips below, and then we get inside the range down here in the extreme. So, and even still, this was only a steel box. We would just be putting a stop up above, and price never even moved. And we weren't even seeing closes above long algo in this particular case until we get down to here. And this one became interesting. We're right at this particular marker, moved up inside there, had the strong move of the MBI. Now, that was the other one that we were looking at with the MBI when it comes across to these, rising or falling. And at this particular point, it had rolled over and was actually beginning its decline. Let me see if I can lift that up a little bit. You can see it clear. So you can see it was starting to come there. And then the next bar, if you wanted to even try and do it, is like, oh, now we're starting a reduction. And that's when we started cascading below, even if we weren't overbought. And the computer will check all of these things as it goes through. This is why you don't see any new buy signals. The closest we got was a blue signal that popped in right here, just as we were trying to get over the long algo at 30.50. Couldn't do it. 30.50, got to this one finally, was a close over. Started to look like it had some potential, in which case the stop was activated at the short algo at that particular point. But then shakeout started turning immediately. And what we looked for in this particular case, and I've talked about this before, is this orange stuck in here. As long as this orange was in here, there was not going to be a buy configuration in any of these setups right here. As long as this orange stayed in the middle range, only when it moves out of it do we get any indication that there's been some activity. Here it was a small attempt, couldn't get below the red, finally got below the red at this particular spot. But by the time the steel came back down underneath, it had already achieved overbought status. I mean, you had yellow, red, yellow, and then we just dipped out of it. It was still like minus 11, so it was right by that minus 10 yellow number. And then we just cascaded lower, and it stayed right here. There's nothing. Now, certainly, individual people looking for like tiny, tiny, tiny little points, you can play these steel pivots back and forth coming up, or even the orange coming through there. If the orange and the steel were both going up at the same time, you'd have a pretty decent up configuration, but you'll notice they were at odds with each other each time. As steel was going down, orange was going up. As steel's going down, orange going down, steel's going up. They weren't in sync, going the right direction to create a move. And it was pretty dramatic. If we enlarge the chart, you can see there just was not a whole lot to play with on that. Now, the fact that this stays into a number one configuration is a good thing because that's what we're segmenting the market within these number categories. Having a little trouble with this one right here where it goes to number 5. Then I stop getting my print of number. I have to have those numbers showing because that would mean that my turnaround signal here from this buy where it finally got above the long algo, improved with the shakeout, rising MBI outside the range of the overbought, and we start to see a move, and then we ended up with a little bit of a no man's land where it gets stopped out with a gain, and you have nothing happening for a couple bars, which could freak some people out, but you really have to learn to relax into some of these things because you will get a signal. Fine, in this particular case, you may be like panicked there and say, I didn't get the exact top. We don't care about the exact tops or peaks of a particular move. What we want are strong signals. Signals where the algorithms have given us an indication that there's a reason to be there and a reason to do something. And that's the whole point. You need to have a reason to do something, not just because you've made a few dollars. You have to have an actual reason why you're making one of these trades. So there you have it. For the most part, pretty clean action from our readings of it. I know a lot of people were caught off guard, didn't know what to expect with this kind of stuff, and or want to shortchange the specific readings. You don't want to be doing that. You want to have a reason. That's why it's so important for me to get you the colors that correspond, because then if you're trading opposite the color, you got to justify why you're doing something that isn't clearly defined and has a reason. So just FYI, I'll be heading to America this weekend. So come Monday morning, I should be in the States, Pacific time. So you'll have me there. Won't interfere with any more updates or anything like that. So we're all set. As always, though, look for me on the Skype chat. Trade well. Talk to you later.